All right, so we just got our first look at season 6 of The Chosen, our first actual scene from the season, which looks pretty incredible. Now, if you haven't seen this, it's on The Chosen's live stream. I didn't do a live stream tonight because I've had a very busy day. More on that coming up in the next couple of weeks or so. But I did want to make this video, of course, talking about this brand new scene and talking about how insane this season is actually going to be. So obviously, I can't show you the scene in its entirety. As always, we're going to show you images and then talk about the scene. I'll tell you all the dialogue that is in this scene though, just in case you didn't see it or if it's been deleted already from the Chosen channel. So let's start from the very beginning. This scene is from John chapter 18, which we're going to jump into in a second, but it focuses on Annas, Caiaphas, and Jesus. Jesus has already been arrested. He's already been betrayed by Judas, as we saw at the end of season 5, and he's been brought into Jerusalem to the house of Caiaphas. And so we're going to talk about the scripture that's related to this, and we're also going to just jump through the actual setting here of the scene. Now, first things first, we've got Caiaphas's house. This is actually the first time ever, though, that we've seen Annas. We've never seen him before, although we've heard a lot about Annas behind the scenes. This is the father-in-law of Caiaphas and the father of Annas. Now, Annas has several other children as well. I think he has 5 sons that end up being high priest at one point or another. Right now, though, obviously Caiaphas, his son-in-law, is the high priest. Basically, Annas is the real kind of superpower mega villain behind the scenes who really has control over everything. Just the forefront, the person who's forward facing in the public is Caiaphas at this time. Now, Caiaphas technically does have all the powers of the high priest and all that kind of stuff, but Annas is so revered and respected behind the scenes and by a lot of the Jewish people that he really does have a lot of the mob boss powers that are prevalent behind the scenes of everything, kind of pulling the strings of everything. Now, in The Chosen, seems like he's just now getting into this whole Jesus thing and learning about Jesus for the first time, really. In reality, I wonder if he would have been more involved the whole entire time. But anyway, regardless of that, let's talk about the scene itself. First off, it starts off with, of course, the reveal of Annas, but then it gets into some of its dialogue, and he says, "It's the middle of the night after a long Seder, so I'm going to ask you to keep your answers concise and to the point. What is the substance and purpose of your teaching?" Now here, Jesus, of course, is annoyed. He's been arrested. He's in front of Annas, and he's in front of these guys. He's being questioned about things that he's answered 1,000 times, right? He's talked about his teaching 1,000 times in public. He's not tried to hide it, and so that's exactly how he answers. He says, "I've spoken openly to the world, and I've always taught in synagogues and the temple where the religious leaders gather." And then Annas says, "That's not an answer." And of course, he's not going to really take that answer. But Jesus is telling him, like, hello, like I've talked to all these people. It's been out in the open. This is not something that's been hidden, right? He says, "I've said nothing in secret. If you wanted this information, you've had many opportunities to obtain it from witnesses." And then he says, "I want to hear it from you. It's a matter of public record. Do you know what who you're talking to?" is what. So Jesus says it's a matter of public record. Then Annas actually speaks up and he says, "Do you know who you're talking to?" Remember, this is his dad that Jesus is, in some ways, Annas is seeing him disrespecting Annas. And so we're seeing Annas kind of defending Annas here. "Do you know who you're talking to?" Then Annas says, "How many peoples have you told your lies to?" And then Jesus says, "I haven't lied. So none?" And then Annas continues, "Could your teachings be interpreted as calls to violence?" And then Jesus says, "Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. They know." And now you can tell that Annas during this time is getting very, very upset. He's not very excited about what Jesus is saying here, basically. Then Annas continues. He says, "If we ban you from ever teaching publicly again, will you comply?" And Jesus replies again. He says, I've also answered that previously as well." And then here is where things begin to get really escalated. We see as Caiaphas looks over and he's talked about this whole situation over and over again to a lot of different people. And while he personally hasn't had a lot of FaceTime with Jesus in particular, he's obviously trying to get Jesus to go through this process. He knows what he wants to do, which is to hand him over to Rome and to have him killed because he's being a problem for the church. And he believes the prophecy that God has given him is that Jesus will die so that the rest of the Jews will be saved, basically. And so that's how he's like kind of looking on the situation. I think it's really interesting, though, that Caiaphas is shown here to be the last person in line, essentially. First is Ananus kind of protecting Annas, and then Annas is sitting in front of Caiaphas. And so Annas is kind of in this seat of power. He's in the throne in Caiaphas' own house, showing that Caiaphas is really just a puppet being used by Annas in a lot of ways. So here's Jesus replying here. He says, I haven't lied. I've told you everything. I haven't done any of this stuff. Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. They know. And this is directly from John chapter 18, by the way. First of all, we get this section where Jesus is betrayed. Love this. I'm super excited for this to come in season 6. Then we get this little moment. So the band of soldiers and their captain and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. First, they led him to Annas, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. It was Caiaphas who had advised the Jews that it would be expedient that one man should die for the people. Now, down here, we get the actual moment that's happening here. The high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus answered him, I have spoken openly to the world. This is almost word for word here in the ESV into what we see in The Chosen. Almost word for word. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple where all Jews come together. Now, in the show, he says all religious leaders instead of all Jews. I think it's to make the point that Jesus is mainly talking about, he knows that they're mainly worried about the things that the religious leaders are worried about, not what the people are worried about, which is why they changed it from all Jews to the religious leaders there. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. They know what I said. Then here's what happens next. So we see Jesus respond. He says, just go ask him, like that's what's happening. And here we see as Annas is not very happy with the answers that he's getting here. And then he keeps on, responding like, hey, go ask the people. Then here is where Ananus gets very, very upset. And he says, is that how you answer the Kohen Hagadol, which is the high priest in Hebrew there? So Kohen Hagadol is a high priest. And we see this really intense moment where he rushes up and he slaps Jesus across the face. This is the first time that we're going to see Jesus being hit, basically, in season 6. The beginning of a lot of punishment for him, which is going to be very, very intense. And so you see this slap coming in and he slaps him there. You see the reaction there. And it's pretty intense in the moment as he comes up and he slaps him pretty quickly there. And you see even Jesus is kind of, obviously he is reeling from it. And then he comes back, he kind of composes himself. You see him kind of look up at Ananus, almost to say like, imagine what I could do to this guy. Like that's the kind of power and like strength that we're seeing in that moment. But then instead of doing anything, of course, Jesus turns the other cheek, which we're going to see. You see Caiaphas' reaction here to the moment. Then we see Jesus as Annas reacts here, and then you see Jesus turn the other cheek here, as if to say, like, go ahead, hit me again, right? Which we've seen before. Now, when Jesus talks about turning the other cheek earlier on in Scripture, which we've seen plenty of times, I believe we've seen it in The Chosen as well. The whole point of turning the other cheek is to demand respect from the person who has just slapped you, right? I can go more into that in another teaching another time, but in this moment here, you definitely feel that. You feel the whole point of this is that Ananus doesn't know how to react to this. You even see this in his facial tones as Jesus turns his other cheek. You see as Ananus is kind of stunned, like he expects some sort of angry response or for Jesus to lurch at him or to, attack him in some way, right? But that's not what happens. Jesus instead turns the other cheek and opens it up for him to get hit again, which is not something that you would expect to see here. So then here, we continue, and he says, as I was saying, Annas says, as I was saying, have you observed to sit at a table and openly eat with tax collectors. And so here Annas continues on this string of questioning, and eventually Ananus actually gives him a paper to read off of in order to have all the details of what Jesus has done. And so here he's kind of questioning him about all these different things that they would consider to be uncouth, and in some cases against the law, right? So he says, first, have you observed to sit at a table and eat openly with tax collectors? And Jesus answers him. He says, yes. Then he says, have you been observed to sit at a table and eat openly with an impure woman? They're talking here specifically about Mary of Bethany and Shmuel's report back to the Sanhedrin about how she came in with the spikenard and, anointed Jesus's feet. And she was an impure woman because, she took her headdress off and washed his feet with her hair, right? And so this is a really interesting response from Jesus, because the question is, have you been observed to sit at a table and eat openly with impure women? And then he answers, I have been observed, as if to say, no, these women are not impure. They've been made pure, essentially. Then they continue. Annas asks, have you shown contempt for Shabbat? And Jesus says, no. And then he says, but you've broken Shabbat and made no apologies, haven't you? Your words, not mine, Jesus says. Then we see as Ananus reaches over, gives Annas a paper, and he says, Abba, which means dad or father. Then we continue on. He reads from the paper, Annas does, and he says, do you count among your followers a zealot? And then Jesus says, some very zealous people, yes. And then Annas says, it's not what I asked you. And then Jesus says, not anymore. Annas says, what? And then Jesus says, none of my followers belong to the fourth philosophy. They belong to me. Then Annas says, And then he says, do you count among your followers a Gentile woman of African descent? And Jesus says, yes. Annas says, do you eat with her? And Jesus says, frequently. And then Annas says, have you ever touched a vessel that she drank from? And Jesus says, I haven't thought about it. Then Annas says, seems like something important enough to think about, doesn't it? And Jesus says, no, not really. Then Annas says, do you intend to bring our people to ruin by leading a revolution to overthrow Rome? And then Jesus says, there's no shortage of record keeping as to my words and teachings. Then this is where Annas kind of gets annoyed. As they have this back and forth, it kind of just keeps on going back and forth between Jesus and Annas here. They have these moments where Jesus is answering the questions, and then Annas is kind of not satisfied with some of the other answers to the questions, and they keep on going back and forth. Then he gets up here, and he goes over to Caiaphas, and they begin to talk here. And Caiaphas says, are you convinced? And then Annas says, I can't make sense of this man. Why isn't he defending himself? And then Caiaphas says, doesn't see the need. Then Annas says and then Caiaphas says he thinks he's above us. Annas says, by asking me to check his references, he confirms that he's unapologetic and that he's known widely. And then Caiaphas says, it's as if he set this, or Annas says, it's as if he set this up himself. So Annas is kind of seeing the plan here of what's going on, right? He sees that there's some inkling of a plan that's happening here, but he can't put together why that is, right? And of course, nobody in the situation really does at the time, right? And then Caiaphas says, what do you mean, set it up? And then Annas says, I mean, if he wanted to avoid arrest and carry out whatever his plan is, there should have been more calculation. Is he being careless? Is he being reckless? Maybe both, Caiaphas says. I agree. We must manage Israel's reputation, and someone like him ought not to be counted among our people's most popular figures. But death? Then Caiaphas says, the prophecy says one man will die for the people. And then he says, but it doesn't say who will perpetrate that death, meaning that the Jews may not be the people that kill Jesus. And then Annas says, it must be Rome. We are doing what's right for the people. We just need to find a reason to hand him over, is how it ends here. And that's how it ends. The last moment here between these two. Really intense scene, of course. The most impactful moment being this slap right here, the first time that Jesus is being hit within the season. Of course, the season is leading to his death. And so very intense stuff going on. I really love the costume for Honest. Really love his design here, and the actor who plays him looks really good as Honest as well. Just from the small scene, everything seemed really solid with him, so I love that choice there. Yeah, same thing with Anonymous. We saw him last season in season 5. He's returning here. Really powerful moment with him and Jesus here. Really intense stuff for sure. Let's read through the rest of this scripture here and talk about this. So just like I said, this is almost word for word here. And then when he said these things, one of the officers standing by struck Jesus with his hand, saying, "Is this how you answer your high priest?" So we're getting basically that exact moment here, but from Anonymous instead. Then Jesus answered him, "If what I said is wrong, bear witness about the wrong. But if what I said is right, why do you strike me?" Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. So this is actually a different area, but they kind of combined it, right? They combined Caiaphas and Annas together. That he came to Annas first because Annas, like I said, is kind of like that mob boss. He's kind of the main guy behind the scenes, in some ways even more important than Caiaphas in certain moments. So really interesting scene for sure. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And what do you think about the future of season 6? Are you excited yet? Lots of stuff to come for sure. We'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.